Hello everyone, I'm the Script Monk, and this is not the video I originally expected to make. See, when I started this Movie Fix series several weeks ago, the idea was simple. Teach concepts on screencraft by finding where disappointing movies went wrong and then figuring out how to fix them. And when I called out Matrix Resurrections as my second film, I was going in cold. See, I wanted the challenge because I hadn't yet seen Resurrections. I had no interest in seeing it when it was in theaters, and all the bad reviews told me not to bother. And believe you me, I was ready to hate this movie. I was so sure I'd blow this off as a page one rewrite that not only did I write an intro to this video before even watching the movie, but I prepared my own completely original pitch for a Matrix sequel. Which, saying it out loud makes me feel like a giant dork, but you know, I actually had some good ideas here. But Matrix Resurrections was not what I expected. It's not what anyone expected, which explains all the negative reactions. See, this movie is not supposed to be a direct sequel to Matrix Revolutions. And it's not just some piece of popcorn eye candy that drags on the franchise. And if you watch this movie thinking that's the case, you're gonna have a bad time. But that's not what this movie is. With Matrix Resurrections, Lana Wachowski has created something that can only be described as an art film. Yeah, let that sink in for a second. Matrix Resurrections is a work of meta-cinema, in that it is a Matrix movie about the cultural phenomena called the Matrix movies. Specifically, it is a surprisingly personal tale about what it's been like to be one of the creators of the Matrix, and the immense psychological toll this has taken.
Did you base your main character on yourself?
There is a lot of me in it. Maybe a little too much.
Because Keanu Reeves is not actually playing Neo in this movie. Reeves is playing a symbolic stand-in for Lana Wachowski herself, in a nightmare story of a creator who has become entrapped by their own creations, of an artist whose baby has grown into a Frankenstein's monster, someone who through the dehumanizing effects of the pop culture industry can no longer separate their identity from that of their own fictional characters, leading to a total and complete psychotic breakdown. To give us something to compare to, Resurrections reminds me of two films. The first is the 2002 Spike Jonze film, Adaptation. Adaptation is a meta-narrative, in that it's a story about its own creation, and the protagonist is the writer himself, Charlie Kaufman.
I've written myself into my screenplay. That's kind of weird, huh?
The film portrays Kaufman slamming his head into the wall as he struggles to adapt a book that has none of the required qualities of a movie story. Tortured by his desire to be brilliant and original, Kaufman descends through depression, self-loathing, and getting yelled at by Robert McKee until life itself warps into the kind of contrived, cliche-filled Hollywood movie Kaufman is trying to avoid. Ultimately, Adaptation is the story of an artist coming to terms with his own limitations as well as those of his chosen medium. Our second movie, and I can't believe I'm saying this, is Federico Fellini's 8½. The movie I humbly consider to be the greatest piece of cinema ever made. 8½ is just as self-reflexive as Adaptation, if not more so. I mean, the title itself is meta. Fellini conceived 8½ after discovering Jungian analytical psychology, resulting in the story of filmmaker Guido Anselmi, a thinly veiled stand-in for Fellini himself. Hailed by all as an artistic genius, Guido battles imposter syndrome during the frenzied preparations for a new film that Guido still has not yet written. But behind his public persona, Guido is weak and flawed. Tormented by a lifetime of shame and guilt, he vainly tries to transform into some kind of movie idea. By getting lost in his dreams, memories, and fantasies, Guido suffers a slow mental breakdown. The unreal becomes real and the real unreal, creating a nightmare from which Guido cannot escape.
He is lost! He has nothing to say!
Matrix Resurrections is another film in this meta-artistic vein. Only it's not as obvious, as Resurrections works far harder to blur the lines between fiction and reality and takes its psychological element to a more extreme level. So to make its meta intentions clear, I'm not going to call the Reeves character Neo, because he's not Neo. Nor will I call him Thomas Anderson. I'm going to simply call this character the Creator. Now the film's meta-artistic intentions are fully on display in the sleight of hand that surrounds this opening prologue. The movie opens with exactly what we expect from another Matrix film. In fact, it mocks our critical expectations by literally giving us a tired rehash of the original movie. But then,
Maybe this isn't the story we think it is.
the movie literally gives us the middle finger. Nope, fooled you. This is the real story, the story of our Wachowski stand-in, the creator of the Matrix trilogy. Only here it's been turned into a trilogy of video games, which kinda makes sense seeing as the virtual world of the Matrix always resembled an immersive multiplayer game, but really things would have been more obvious if it had been kept as movies. Anyway, the implication of this abrupt shift in setting is that everything we just saw in the prologue was completely fictional and had no existence outside of the mind of the creator. This is a common movie trope, where a movie begins with some fantastic scenario only to abruptly reveal it's fake or imaginary. But you might be thinking, hey, that's not so obvious. You could take that in a lot of different ways. Yes, absolutely. And that's one of the qualities that defines Matrix Resurrections as an art film. See, the language of an art film is ambiguity. In an art film, nothing is made explicit. It doesn't take you by the hand and guide you through the story the way commercial movies do. A real art film expects the viewer to put some work into understanding it. Now, there are many different kinds of art film. So to clarify what we're dealing with, art cinema tends to come in three varieties. The first type is pure experimentation with the cinematic form. Not really relevant here. The second type is the objective realist variety. These films try to reproduce reality down to its most mundane little detail. These are the kind that usually don't contain much plot. Finally, we have the opposite, the subjective formalist variety of art film, where reality is thrown out the window and nothing should be taken at face value. These stories contain strange or incongruous material that must be interpreted figuratively, symbolically, or as the externalization of a character's mental state. You're not supposed to take these films literally. If you read them literally, you're gonna have a bad time. Resurrections is of the third variety, and this type essentially operates as a puzzle to solve. And part of this puzzle is the intentional use of ambiguity to leave the door open to potentially misleading interpretations. Indeed, Resurrections is playing a game with us by intentionally misusing our expectations of what a Matrix movie is supposed to be.
What made Matrix different? You left with your head.
See, the original Matrix was so mind-bending because it inverted our notions of reality and fantasy. It gave us a world that resembled our own and told us it was fake. It then took us to a fantasy realm and convinced us that it was the real. But Resurrections knows that the novelty has worn off. The audience already knows about the inversion and now expects it to be the case. So Resurrections F's with our head again by inverting the inversion. It knows that when you see this world, you're going to presume it to be another simulated Matrix. And when you see these familiar settings, you're going to presume that it is once again the real. But this time, the opposite is true. This is the objective reality, while this is the world of illusion. Resurrections intentionally plays with your assumptions to screw with your head once more. In other words, if you try to interpret Resurrections as you did the old film, you're playing a new game by the old rules, and you're gonna get lost. However, if you pick up enough cues to recognize the inversion, and from that realize this is a meta-narrative about the Matrix's creator, we find ourselves in the same position as an 8.5 or adaptation. We are not seeing the story world objectively, but viewing all things through the psychology of an artist as he undergoes a mental breakdown. Like in the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, if reality seems warped, it's only because we're viewing all things through the warped subjectivity of its main character. Thus, all those sudden flashes from the original trilogy are meant to be read subjectively. These are clues that the creator is misassociating his current experiences with his fictional creations, as he loses the ability to tell the difference between fantasy and reality. Therefore, this is not really Neo, at least not that Neo. This is not really Trinity, at least not that Trinity. This is certainly not Morpheus, and this is definitely not Agent Smith. Just like how the familiar faces we encounter in dreams are not the actual people, these are merely projections of the creator's troubled psyche as he loses his grips on reality. Now, what am I basing all this on? Well, here's the thing about the subjective variety of art film. If you've ever struggled through something like one of David Lynch's later films, you know these films can be a real challenge, because they require the viewer to figure out the code by which to decipher all the content. And Resurrections becomes far clearer once we realize how deeply the original trilogy was informed by concepts from Jungian analytical psychology. And by pure coincidence, I happen to know this is the key to the code, because I just did a video on Jungian archetypes, which ends with an analysis of the Matrix's use of these archetypes to create an intentional Jungian myth. In fact, I'm going to need you to pause this video and click on the link above to watch that video, because otherwise you're not going to understand much of what follows. Go ahead, I'll wait. go! Oh, you're back. As I hope that video made clear, much of the mythical power of the original Matrix came from the intentional use of Jungian archetypes to connect with our humanity on a deep psychological level. And as Joseph Campbell spent much of his life proving, this externalization of unconscious experiences is at the root of myth-making and the source of countless popular narratives. The only difference is that while most storytellers only grasp the archetypes intuitively, the Wachowskis had the knowledge to implement Jung's ideas for intentional effect. And while Jungian motifs continue in both Reloaded and Revolutions, Resurrections takes Jung to a whole nother level by placing its entire discourse within the psychology of its protagonist. And when we recognize the Jungian basis of its discourse, we find that Matrix Resurrections is not just a meta-narrative on the cultural phenomena called the Matrix movies, but a highly intimate tale of the destructive effects of the pop culture industry on the psyche of the artist when their work is so closely bound to their own soul. With this in mind, we find that Matrix Resurrections is structurally divided into two exclusive halves. Part 1 charts the creator's mental decline into schizophrenia and total detachment from reality. This section is set in the creator's actual everyday world. Events, however, are not presented objectively. Rather, all things are filtered through the creator's disintegrating mental state. We see what he sees as he sees it. Part 2 operates wholly within the dark, shadowy underground of the creator's unconscious, playing out something like a coma dream. This narrative presents a Jungian fairy tale through which the creator is psychically healed and made whole once more. Since these two halves operate in two completely different planes of reality, or to be more accurate, two different planes of consciousness, events and characters in Part 1 should be read quite differently from those in Part 2. Basically, everything in Part 1 should be read objectively, in the way Carl Jung would analyze a patient's behavior. In Part 2, everything should be read subjectively, in the way Jung would interpret a person's dreams. Right now, I'm going to walk us through Part 1, where the meta elements and the Jungian psychopathy stand out most clearly. As for Part 2, that might have to wait till later, because there is a lot to get through here. As already covered, Resurrections begins with its mind-effing prologue, intentionally designed to screw with audience expectations, only to throw us into the real story of the creator. But though the events of this prologue existed nowhere but in the mind of the creator, it wasn't all just fun and games, as it introduced two Jungian archetypes who will serve critical roles later on. But for now, we dismiss this daydream and enter the real, everyday world of the creator. What follows serves as the movie's setup sequence. Here we are led to identify the Reeves character as a Wachowski stand-in, as we get a glimpse of what it's been like to be a Wachowski day in, day out for the past 20 years. Everywhere the creator goes, people will not stop referencing the Matrix, won't stop quoting his own dialogue back to him, won't stop gushing all over him, won't stop treating a 2-decade-old creation as the totality of his identity, which the creator all finds tiresome and embarrassing. The creator likely wishes everyone would just forget about the Matrix and move on. In Jungian terms, the creator is no longer comfortable with his persona. Persona is Carl Jung's term for the version of ourselves we show the world. It is the social mask behind which our genuine self, the ego, resides. For a quick illustration, do you think I always talk like this? Do you think I always wear a tie? You think my real name is Scriptmonk? No, this is a persona through which I present myself on YouTube. In real life, I swear a lot more. Now, usually we have control over how the world sees us, but sometimes, especially in the case of celebrities, the persona is created for us. Who we supposedly are is decided by how others choose to see us. So instead of wearing the mask wears us. And when there's a growing divide between the true self and a false persona, existential crisis can occur. And indeed, the pressures of a celebrity persona have taken a heavy toll on the creator's mental health. He suffers from anxiety, he needs therapy and medication, he has contemplated and attempted suicide. Carrying the identity of the Matrix's genius has become a curse he would prefer to leave behind. But at the inciting incident, the creator's worst fears are realized. This Frankenstein's monster called the Matrix comes back to life in what stands out as the most self-reflexive moment in the entire film.
Our beloved parent company, Warner Brothers, has decided to make a sequel to the trilogy.
What?
Now, just to clear up some rumors, Warner Brothers did not contact Lana Wachowski with an ultimatum to make this new movie or else. According to various interviews, the studio did contact the Wachowskis on a nearly yearly basis, begging them to continue the franchise, to which the Wachowskis always declined. Over time, it became known the studio was working with various writers, most notably Ready Player One scribe Zach Penn, to develop various sequels, reboots, and spin-offs, since Warner's had the legal right to continue the franchise without its creators. But this was all rendered moot in 2018 when Lana Wachowski voluntarily contacted the studio with the idea for the movie we're talking about right now. But while this wasn't the gun-to-the-head ultimatum depicted in Resurrections, the fact that the script explicitly name-checks Warner Brothers without any need to do so is the most on-the-nose indicator of the meta-artistic intentions of this film, openly suggesting that much of what follows was directly inspired by the Wachowskis' past frustrations with the Warner corporate machine. More importantly, the fact that this scene operates as the movie's inciting incident, situated at that classic 1/8 point in the 3-act structure, proves that I am on the right track with my reading of this film. By the rules of movie structure, which by the way the Wachowskis are experts in. I mean, the structure of the original Matrix is just mwah, it's a textbook case. By the rules of movie structure, the inciting incident establishes the main story problem and sets up the course of conflict to follow. If Resurrections was supposed to be a straightforward continuation of the original Matrix trilogy, this event would be meaningless. Why would the machines care about a new video game? What does a new video game have to do with a bunch of cyberpunks trying to free humanity? But when read as meta-narrative, this becomes the catalyst of everything that follows. It sets off the creator's mental crisis, his spiral into madness, and his eventual quest for psychic renewal. And look no further than the following sequence to support this. Here we watch the creator sink into depression as he sees what has happened to the creation that once meant so much to him. It has become corporatized and commodified, the subject of market research and focus groups. It is now in the hands of a bunch of pseudo-intellectual pop culture clowns who not only don't understand the creator's work, but do nothing but talk in circles. The creator has lost all control and could not feel more detached from this product of his creative soul. Like his own character Neo, the creator has become mentally enslaved to a dehumanizing corporate machine. And if you pay attention in this sequence to things like day and night, repetitive actions, and all the times characters switch clothing from shot to shot, this montage covers a span of 28 days, which would be enough to drive anybody insane. By the way, this guy needs a bigger wardrobe. He basically wears the same 3 outfits again and again. And in true art film style, this sequence gives us a subtle clue on how to interpret what's to follow. At the end of day 7, the creator spies a graffito that reads, "It is so much simpler to bury reality than it is to dispose of dreams." The creator chooses to bury reality. It is at this moment that the creator decides to stop taking his meds and journey down the rabbit hole. At the latest, he stops taking his meds here, around day 20. In any case, the creator's persona has begun to crack, and his descent into madness is well underway. But before getting into that, we need to discuss 2 important characters in Resurrection's art film Labyrinth. The creator's corporate associate, played by Jonathan Groff, and the woman at the coffee shop, played by Carrie Ann Moss. Here, Resurrections gives us 2 big fat red herrings. By playing everything through the mental perspective of its protagonist, Resurrections tries to mislead us into believing these 2 are the characters Agent Smith and Trinity. But they are not Smith and Trinity. How can they appear to be, yet not be? Well, you need to understand the Jungian concept of projection. Did you watch that other video? I hope you did, because otherwise you're going to get lost. As I stated in that video, at the core of Jung's method is a process called individuation, whereby the adult individual becomes psychically whole by reintegrating the lost unconscious parts of the self. Of these lost parts, 2 are most important: the shadow and the anima or animus. The shadow is a personification of everything about ourselves that the conscious ego has repressed because they are deemed as shameful, unacceptable, or wrong. And the first hurdle of individuation is to reconcile oneself with the shadow, because we can't face down the deeper fears and traumas in our conscious until we first confront and take control of these darker rejected parts of ourselves. But Jung warns when someone has not yet taken charge of their shadow, they will tend to project their shadow onto other people. That is, they will see in other people the qualities they fear or despise about themselves, casting these things out onto a scapegoat. Now, from my Jung video, you'll know Agent Smith did not play the shadow archetype in the original Matrix. He was rather a personification of a psychological demon Thomas Anderson needed to overcome. Although you could argue that Smith plays Neo's shadow in Reloaded and Revolutions. But we're not dealing with Neo here, but with the creator. the man whose mind invented Smith and Neo. Now, the creator has come to identify his ego with his heroic character Neo. In the same way, he has attached his shadow to his antagonist character, Agent Smith. And since the creator has an antagonistic relationship with the Groff character, and since this slick yuppie represents all the qualities the creator likely hates about himself as a commercial artist, the creator projects his shadow onto his associate in the form of his fictional character, Agent Smith. That is, he unconsciously perceives the qualities of Smith in his associate. And later, when the creator suffers his psychotic breakdown, he loses the ability to differentiate his shadow figure from the person it's been projected upon. So, from the creator's warped point of view, the associate literally turns into the shadow Smith. By the way, Resurrections never gives the Groff character a proper name. This is done intentionally. With the lack of a name, we also have difficulty telling the difference between this actual person and the projected shadow. Though this person is not Smith, we can only call them Smith, thus conflating the two identities. But while here, the lack of a name is used to obscure projection, with the Carrie-Anne Moss role, naming is used to indicate that projection is indeed occurring. Just as this person is not actually Agent Smith, this person is not actually Trinity. She is this woman, Tiffany. And if you listen to her dialogue, you can tell that Tiffany's personality and speech patterns are quite different from the Trinity of the original Matrix films. Once again, projection is occurring, this time through the archetype of the anima. As I also explained in my Jung video, the anima or animus is considered the lost unconscious yin to the ego's yang, split off during childhood as society molds us into who we are supposed to be. And just as the yin and yang maintains there's a duality of feminine and masculine in all things, of which one is typically dominant, the anima contains the quote-unquote feminine qualities typically repressed in a male persona, and the animus, the quote-unquote masculine qualities typically repressed in a female persona. According to Jung, the adult psyche cannot reach full maturity until it reintegrates its ego with its lost opposite half. An adult needs the full complement of human qualities to become a proper parent, marital partner, or social role model. Until this occurs, the person will continue to behave with the immature mindset of a little boy or girl. However, when this has not yet occurred, a person will try to compensate for their missing anima or animus by projecting this archetype onto a person of desire. And according to Jung, this is the source of many romantic difficulties, particularly when a person falls head over heels for someone, only to later find out they are not the person they thought them to be. What has happened is one person has projected their anima or animus onto the other in the hopes of finding their perfect other half. So, just as the creator identifies his ego with his character Neo and his shadow with his character Agent Smith, he also identifies his anima with his character Trinity. And since this movie presents everything through the subjectivity of the creator, Tiffany is given the appearance of Trinity, because the creator is projecting his anima upon her. Unfortunately, this delusion is reinforced by the fact that Tiffany, who seems to have a bit of the crazies herself, is doing some projection of her own. Tiff says she played the Matrix games and strongly identified with the Trinity character. So Tiff is projecting her ego onto Trinity just as the creator projects his ego onto Neo. But this is yet another red herring, misleading the audience to believe that Tiffany is Trinity when this is not actually the case. How do I know I'm on the right track with all this Jungian projection? Because the Neil Patrick Harris character literally says all this at the 37-minute mark. He also gives another description of projection in an earlier scene. One should pay close attention to these two scenes with the analyst because they give the most clues on how to decipher this film. I should, however, say that this material applies to only part 1 of the story. Part 1 takes place in the actual world, where Groff and Moss play normal people upon whom the archetypes have been projected. Part 2 takes place in the dream world of the creator's unconscious. There, these people are not the actual persons, but personifications of the archetypes themselves. But I'll get to that when the time comes. On that note, I should say something about the Neil Patrick Harris role, the analyst. While Part 2 of Resurrections casts the analyst in the role of the villain, here in Part 1 he is a psychotherapist and nothing more. The reason the creator's unconscious might use the image of the analyst for its antagonist in the latter, completely imaginary half of the film is easily explained by the common occurrence of transference. In psychoanalytical sessions, patients may form antagonistic feelings towards the therapist, unconsciously identifying the therapist with the oppression of their mother, father, or whatever authority figure weighs most heavily on their psyche. So, in the latter half of Resurrections, the image of the analyst serves as a stand-in for the unbearable force that really oppresses the creator's psyche. which I'll get to when the time comes. But here in part 1, the analyst is the voice of objective reason, there to counterbalance the creator's growing schizophrenia. Indeed, to really make sense of part 1, we should view all things from the perspective of the analyst, and not of the creator. But the analyst is unaware of just how unstable the creator's mind has become. And at the end of Act 1 turning point, everything falls apart. The events of part 1 have fractured the creator's fragile persona, and when this mask slips away, the ego is left vulnerable to all kinds of psychic dangers. As Jung would put it, the mind falls into the power of primordial images. Jung considered schizophrenia the lowering of the barrier of consciousness, thus allowing the irrational thoughts and images encountered in dreams to invade one's waking life. Though this is no longer considered a valid definition for schizophrenia, it is an apt way to describe what happens in the following sequence. The creator has fallen into a state of waking dream. Now, dreams express the unconscious fears, desires, and anxieties floating about in our unconscious through content borrowed from our waking thoughts and experiences. And since the creator has just spent 4 weeks surrounded by nothing but thoughts about his imaginary world of the Matrix, it's only natural that his waking dreams should borrow tropes of the Matrix to express his psychic crisis. It should thus be made obvious that nothing in the following sequence is actually real. Here, Resurrections uses the same tactic as in the Ron Howard film A Beautiful Mind, where the perspective is so entrenched in the protagonist's schizophrenia that viewers are misled into believing the delusions to be 100% real. But who should come to the creator's aid during this time of crisis? The archetypes. To back up a little, the archetypes encountered in dreams, which later make their way into myths and folktales, are expressions of deep primordial formations in the unconscious, which tend to appear in certain general forms, although the specific appearance is always determined by the mind of the dreamer. Now, the 2 archetypes we've mentioned thus far, the shadow and the anima or animus, represent actual parts of the psyche. But there's another class of archetypes that represent certain guiding impulses that show up during times of need. You might call these archetypes a sort of psychic self-defense mechanism, as they tend to appear in dreams during times of mental crisis. And the first of these archetypes is the Herald. Like the role initially served by Trinity in the OG Matrix, the Herald confronts the ego to say, "Stop, things are going wrong. Follow me on a path of growth and renewal." This is the classic call to adventure moment in storytelling. But should the ego resist, it is also the Herald's job to force the ego to accept this path by any means necessary. And as we see later in Resurrections, the Herald must literally beat the crap out of the creator's ego until he gives in to his archetype's demands. But what is the deal with the presentation of this character? He's called Morpheus, but really that's just pointlessly confusing. Not only do these 2 Morphei share different archetypal functions, but they don't look or behave anything like each other. Okay, Morpheus is the Greek god of dreams, symbolic as the original Morpheus acted as Neo's awakener, and a herald is also a kind of awakener. But if we want to go mythological, this guy's better off compared to the most famous herald of them all, the Greek god Hermes. Hermes is frequently cast as the messenger of the gods, but only because his purpose was to be the bringer of change. Really, Hermes is the god of liminal spaces. He's the guardian of journeys, passageways, crossroads, anything in the process of change or the in-between. And Resurrections gives us a herald who is literally a liminal being, an entity who is never fully here nor there and can only really exist in the in-between.
In between everything and nothing.
Furthermore, if you've read into Greek mythology, you'll know that Hermes had a pretty unique personality. He's charming and charismatic, he's stylish and likes a good joke. You can't pin Hermes down because he's always on the move. So I'm not even going to call this guy Morpheus. His name is Mr. Hermes. But getting back to the story, the creator refuses the Herald's call, and with that, all hell breaks loose. Now you might assume these SWAT guys are just agents of the Matrix sent to prevent blah blah bling bling blah. But no, these are also products of the creator's psyche, manifested in response to his internal resistance to his archetypes. You'll notice that whenever such counterforces arrive, they always do at the exact moment the creator finds good reason to reject his archetypes.
This can't be real. You're the one that hacked my modal?
Yeah.
Thomas?
We got company.
How'd they find us?
So the creator rejects the archetype's help in favor of his unchecked schizophrenia, and with that, the symbolism starts coming hard and fast. An out-of-nowhere explosion signals the final rupture of the creator's sanity. This is immediately followed by water, the universal union symbol of the unconscious. And it's not just a little water, but a flood quickly rising to submerge the conscious ego. In this state, the creator is no longer able to tell the difference between reality and dream, and thus his primordial images come to life. With nothing left to keep the dark, uncontrollable impulses of the shadow at bay, the creator watches helplessly as his own shadow, the projection of everything he hates and fears about himself, executes his ego point blank. This is so symbolically meaningful. The creator's ego, his I am, his entire sense of conscious self, has been murdered. After this point, it's no wonder that the creator confuses himself with his fictional character Neo, because his actual sense of self has been destroyed. The following scene with the analyst tries to give some rationalizations to draw the creator back into reality. But the creator is too far gone, and we soon find him on the edge of a building, so mentally shattered that he is ready to annihilate himself completely. But who should come to his rescue? Another archetype. Bugs is another curious addition. Narratively, Bugs serves the same purpose as the original Morpheus. She is a ship captain who escorts the hero across the threshold and serves as his guide on the other side. But there's a big difference between Bugs and Morpheus. The OG Morpheus served the archetype of the wise old man. In dreams and myth, the wise old man functions to give guidance to the young and inexperienced ego hero. But the creator is not young and inexperienced. His problem is that too much experience has exhausted his psyche. Furthermore, Bugs is not old. She is very young, especially for a ship captain. And in a franchise where every character is given a symbolic name, it's weird that Bugs is given a silly, childish name.
My name is Bugs. As in Bunny.
Now, the reference to Bugs Bunny is misleading, so it's actually a poor choice. Bugs Bunny is a classic example of the trickster archetype. And while Bugs does have some of the free-willed personality traits of a trickster, she does not serve a trickster role in this story. Instead, the key to her archetype is in her youth. Bugs serves an archetype not included in the original Matrix, that of the child. The appearance of the child archetype signals a need for rebirth and renewal. Whenever adult life has drained us of our vitality, whenever our outlook becomes too rigid or one-sided, the child beckons us to return to the font of renewal. And as confirmation, the first thing Bugs tells the creator is how she was born of his previous mental crisis. When the creator previously attempted suicide, this act summoned the child archetype to guide the creator to psychic rebirth. So when the creator once again stands on the edge of self-annihilation, the child grabs his hand and says, "No, follow me instead." And this time the creator obeys. Now, the first thing I noticed about these white hallway scenes is how they imitate the spatial properties of dreams, the way dreams instantly shift from one location to another. Suddenly, we're on a train, another symbolic space, a transitory space, hurtling somewhere deeper into the creator's mind. And just as suddenly, we arrive in the liminal space between the conscious and the unconscious. This is the same space we all pass through each night, just as we drift off to sleep. That strange half-conscious state where random images get projected onto the movie screen in our minds. And who do we find again in this liminal space? Why, our god of liminal spaces, the Herald. The archetype's objective is clear. Convince the creator to cross over to the unconscious so healing might begin. But dream archetypes, being merely unconscious impulses, can only work with whatever material the dreamer's mind supplies. So if the mind is in a state of paranoid schizophrenia focused on the imaginary world of the Matrix, that's the material they have to use. But if you pay close attention, you'll find the archetypes never explicitly confirm nor deny the creator's delusions.
If I haven't lost my mind, does that mean this happened? Then we died.
Obviously not.
What they do give is a bunch of technical BS to explain away any remaining cause for resistance. And it is BS. Schizophrenia is great at covering up its own logical holes, and sometimes when someone suffers a psychotic breakdown, you just gotta play along. Now I should mention how characters in this film no longer travel through phone lines, but through mirrors. And mirrors are used as a constant visual motif throughout the first half of this film. Mirrors are yet another Jungian symbol. Mirrors reflect the ego. They show us who we are. And Jung said that if you look into a mirror in a dream, you'll be surprised by what you see. Now I said how water is the symbol of the unconscious, and water also reflects like a mirror. So the two symbols are connected. So as Lewis Carroll sensed back in 1871, a journey through the looking glass represents a passage through the barrier of consciousness to the unfathomable depths on the other side. To sum up the remainder of part 1, the creator catches one last moment of lucidity, and the ensuing doubt triggers another response from the creator's internal resistance. But this time, the resistance is overcome. The creator travels through the mirror, breaks the barrier between the two psychic realms, and emerges in the vast, shadowy underground of his unconscious. End of part 1. Oh man, look at the time. I still have laundry to do. I'm afraid I'll have to break this sucker in half because part 2 of Resurrections is a whole other can of worms. So make sure you're subscribed because when I come back, I'll be answering the biggest, most controversial questions still remaining about this movie. Questions like, why does this movie repeat Act 2A of the original Matrix almost scene by scene? Why is reconnecting with Trinity so damn important? What's the deal with Not Smith popping up those 2 times? Why does Trinity become more powerful in the end? Exactly who or what is the analyst? And of course, what does this all mean? But before concluding, I should address what's likely the elephant in the room. Am I reading too much into this? Could Lana Wachowski really have intended to do all I'm saying? Well, as far as Lana's conscious intentions go, probably not. But that's not really a big deal. See, aside from being highly educated in psychology and modern philosophy, from what I've seen, Lana Wachowski strikes me as a highly intuitive storyteller. See, on the topic of artists, Carl Jung saw 2 types: cerebral artists and visionary artists. Cerebral artists are inspired by everyday human behavior, while visionary artists gravitate towards the fantastic, the mythical, and the uncanny because they possess a deeply intuitive, though never fully conscious, awareness of the archetypal dramas in their mind. And the story Lana tells of how she came up with Resurrections puts her squarely in the visionary camp. In 2018, Lana was in a period of grieving after the sudden death of both her father and her mother. I previously said how archetypes tend to appear in dreams during times of mental crisis, and Lana says she woke up in the middle of the night with a story for Resurrections suddenly formed in her head. She goes on to say how working on the story helped her process her grief. So, we have an artist in a state of mental crisis. In response, the artist's mind seizes upon her past characters already imbued with archetypal significance, to create an imaginary journey through which the artist is made psychically whole once more. Now, doesn't that sound familiar? However, visionary artists often have trouble articulating their intuitions.
It's not a 4th rectangle in a series of rectangles, but rather it's a rectangle that encompasses all previous rectangles.
So we must not overlook the contribution of Lana's 2 co-writers, David Mitchell and Alexander Heyman. In interviews, the 2 writers say Lana was like an idea machine, constantly producing material from her imagination. And it was basically their job to shape this intuitive flow into a working narrative. Now, this sounds a lot like how Carl Jung explains the creation of mythology. In Jung's view, a mythological story is the result of a powerful encounter with the archetypes of the unconscious. In the attempt to make sense of the encounter, the conscious mind creates a narrative to give things sense, order, and meaning. But in the process, shifts and misunderstandings can occur, especially when the storyteller is not the same person who had the original experience. Now, Mitchell and Heyman are both talented writers, but when collaborators are not on the same psychic wavelength as, say, siblings tend to be, it's far more likely for shifts to occur, as each collaborator provides their own perspective. So the original mythic intuitions might get hidden under the surface. So yes, you might say I've been interpreting Resurrections as one must interpret a myth. You cannot take mythic content literally. You must seek out the psychic impulses that generated the myth, and from that find the key to unlock the code. And boy, do we have a lot to unlock in part 2, when we enter a Jungian fairy tale that plays by a whole new set of rules. So make sure to like and subscribe, because when I return, we're following the White Rabbit into Wonderland. I'm the Script Monk. I'll see you then.